Hello, and welcome to
B.T.F.O, or Brief Thoughts on. This time I'll be talking about The Marsh King's Daughter. This film came out in 2023. Not very many people saw it. Really limited theatrical release from what I can tell, and almost zero marketing. I did end up seeing it in theaters. I had to go out to, I think West Jordan was the only place showing it. But, so I had to go out to West Jordan. The only way that I knew about this movie was because I was kind of bored and just looking on, my theater app to see what movies were playing. And I happened to see that, that's weird. There's this movie with Daisy Ridley and Ben Mendelson that I haven't heard anything about. So, I went in basically blind. I hadn't seen a trailer or really read a description. They had a brief one on the movie app, but nothing too substantial. And overall, I'd say that this film is it's a little better quality than a Lifetime thriller. Something that you would see on the Lifetime channel. But it's not great. I think it could have been, which I think is really unfortunate, but we'll get more into that as far as spoilers go. But to talk about sort of just the plot, basically you start in the past where Ben Mendelson, he's kidnapped this girl and taken her to this little cabin in the woods, and then they end up having a daughter, and they're raising her in the woods and stuff. And then eventually the mom and the daughter are able to get out, and they're found by a ranger or something, and they go back to society. And then the father is captured not too long after. And then the bulk of the story takes place in the future, where the mother has died. Ben Mendelson is still in prison when we start in the future. And then Daisy Ridley is playing the little girl all grown up. And she basically, no one around her knows about her past. She's taken great efforts to conceal that. So basically, she finds out through the news that her father has escaped from prison, and it sends her into this sort of panic state of worrying that he is going to come after her or her family. And at the same time that she has to deal with that, she also has to deal with the fact that everyone around her, she now has to explain her past to. And it's kind of an interesting character study in that sense of, how does one deal with the fact that everyone around you now doesn't trust you. And so that's kind of neat, and it gives Daisy Ridley some actual chances to show off her acting chops, which is really cool. All throughout this film, she does an American accent, which is really good. I was kind of surprised because Ben Mendelsohn's American accent is not that great in this film. It switches from Valley Girl, California to Deep South to Midwest and everywhere in between. But Daisy Ridley's is fairly consistent. There's a couple moments when she's yelling that you can kind of hear the British leaking through. But and as far as like acting goes, yeah, this is probably the film that I'd point people to be like, hey, look, she can actually act. It's a shame we didn't get to see that in the Star Wars sequels. But so basically, through a series of events, she ends up feeling like her father has been, or well, not feeling like. I guess she knows to a reasonable level that her father has been around their house, and so she decides that she's going to go confront him. So she goes to the cabin where they were at, and it's all run down and they've got graffiti all over the place. But she ends up confronting her dad, and her stepdad shows up and her dad ends up killing him. But then basically the end of the film is spurred on where they get into a situation where Ben Mendelson is able to handcuff Daisy Ridley, and he tells her, look, you're my daughter, I love you, we're going to Canada, but first I'm going to go back and grab your daughter, and then we'll all go up to Canada together, and we'll live in the woods once again as like a big happy family. And they don't get into whether or not like he sexually abused her, or if that's his plan. Which, I mean, that's fine if you don't want to get into. I do feel like it's a little important for understanding the dynamic, but they more so want to focus on, because the idea that they come to is Ben Mendelson tells Daisy Ridley, he goes, well, look at all the things that I've done for my family. Like, what are you even willing to do for your family? And Daisy Ridley has this moment of realizing, I'd be willing to die for my family. And so then she's in a situation where they're on like the side of this cliff, and she can push Ben Mendelson all the way down the cliff, but in order to get him to like be able to fall down the cliff, she has to also fall down the cliff. And I was actually surprised. It's one of the moments where, because a lot of films will mess up when trying to portray a sacrifice, they'll often have a character in a situation that they could easily get out of and still accomplish their goal. However, this film actually does a pretty good job at showing that, like, no, she needs to sacrifice herself to accomplish this goal. And so they end up falling down, they're in the river, and it's the same shot that they start the film on, but when they start the film, they have a opening narration that is the original mother reading a poem about motherhood to Daisy Ridley, like as a younger kid. And then right here near the end of the film, on that same shot, they've now overlaid it with the same narration, but this time it's Daisy Ridley reading that poem about motherhood to her daughter. I thought this was a really cool place to end the film. Like, this would be really neat to have it bookended by this shot, bookended by this poem, and like to express clearly what the film is about. And if it ended there, I thought it would be really good. However, for some reason it continues on another like 2 minutes, because they have both Daisy Ridley and Ben Mendelson, they wake up in the river, they each have a pistol and they pull it on each other, and Daisy Ridley just happens to shoot him before she got shot. And then she gets in the kayak and starts paddling down the river, and then as the camera gets blocked by like reeds and like trees, her kayak disappears, and so then the film ends, and it's supposed to be ambiguous as to like, oh, did she live or die? And it's like, you could have had that if you didn't have the final shootout. The final shootout feels really cheap, and like it really, to me, it feels like it undoes a lot of like the whole purpose behind her sacrifice, because it's like, well, no, if like they both live through that, then it's like, well, that was a pretty poor decision. Because like I could see like, oh, she happens to live, that doesn't undermine her sacrifice. She was still willing to die. But if they both live pretty well after that, then it's like, well, that wasn't much of a sacrifice then, was it? The only other real problem that I had with this film was just that the locations feel really off, because Daisy Ridley in her home, we get one line from her husband about how he works in Detroit, so they're fairly close to like that area in like the Midwest Chicago area. And then the cabin is supposed to be down by like San Francisco in California. And then Ben Mendelson wants to kayak from San Francisco up to Canada. And in the film treats it as though all of these things don't take a whole lot of time, which it's like, no, if you're driving across the country or even halfway across the country, that's gonna take a while. If you're planning on kayaking up to California, I mean, you can do it. That's not going to be an easy task, especially for someone who hasn't kayaked in the past 20 years, but yeah. But overall, I'd recommend it. Like, if you're at all interested, I'd recommend watching it. But yeah, I think that's just about all my brief thoughts on The Marsh King's Daughter. So thank you for watching, and bye-bye.